If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Law by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the masquerade. In this episode, we will be discussing the Inconnu, an extremely secretive sect of vampires that pursue Golconda. We will explore their origins, motives, and what sort of cultures these kindred live. Have you learned nothing, child? After all this time, I would have hoped you would have gained some common sense, but all this freedom I have bestowed onto you has only encouraged you to think, and oh boy, what thoughts have you spun? No hiding in the underworld or locked away in a mountain can change the very nature of our existence, the very order of things. We are all victims of the great vampirical jihad, paradoxical beings that plot and manipulate all that we touch. We are parasitical leeches that drain the very essence out of our food and our prey, so do not stand there and tell me vampires are capable of peace. No one is free from this cycle. No one is free from the cycle of violent torment. No one, child. No one. Clearly, you need further convincing, my ignorant fool. Perhaps I should regale you a tale of vampires nearly as old as I, that came together to seek out the fantastical, mythical state of being known as Golconda. But in their attempt to find their inner peace, they have locked a civilization in time, trapped in their own bloody horrors, undead aliens, collectively known as the Inconnu. No, they are not extraterrestrial life, you buffoon, but a secret group of vampires hidden from prying eyes amidst a castle in the Carpathians. I am told it is the Hundadora Castle this forgotten cult reside, which I believe is considered a tourist spot for mortals to visit in Romania. Curious that this is the case, but I highly doubt that they are the same castle. I suspect these two castles are separate entities, with the more public-facing castle as some sort of front. The Corvin Castle, as the castle governing the Inconnu is, as I have already shared with you, hidden. The castle is not a training ground for Golconda practitioners, though I suspect there are many who assume that to be the case, but I highly doubt there are many among your number who know what they are, let alone care for the existence of them. But I digress. They are members of the sect who exist out of the castle, known as monitors, who are elders that watch over or manipulate the kindred of a specific city on behalf of the Inconnu, existing in said domain for the rest of their existence. But their headquarters, for lack of a better phrase, is the Hundadora Castle. For the sake of this conversation and your pathetic mortal brain, this is the only Hundadora Castle in our world. The Inconnu members that claim the Hundadora Castle as their base of operations are the Council of 12, the most inner circle of the Inconnu, the alleged leaders of the sect, but this was not always the case, as it was once the haven of the Zemnitsi voivodes, such as Damik Ruffin, and supposedly a manifestation of the Zemnitsi antediluvian. However, at some point, Damik was slain by his Zemnitsi enemies, and his child, Danica, inherited some of his holdings, including Hundadora. Danica would become one of the Inconnu, but that would be much later down the line, or down the road, as it were. Danica was embraced in about 100 BCE, territory if my sources are to be trusted, outliving the civilization of her people, taking pride in her coldonic sorcery pursuits, and she would fight the Tremere and Gargoyles on the front lines of something known as the Omen Wars. By this point, Danica was known by many of her ilk, an elder, and the uprising of the Anak Revolt frightened her, as it did many of the ancient Canaanites of the time. Clearly, she was not to flee and hide, much like the few Coldons that survived the revolt, but the world had moved on, and her gods were truly obsolete, no longer being able to hear their voices. The king she would watch had moved on, leaving her existence, well, Pointless. They would meditate afloat her mountain, finding no answers before exploring the world, leaving her then new child, Antazi Ladislav, previously the seneschal of Hundedora. She would remain hidden from the infant Camarilla anarchs in Sabat, but would find a salubri warrior whose age and prowess in combat far excelled her own. More importantly, his aura blazed with colour she'd never seen from the undead. They also shared a mutual hatred for the Tremere, but let's be honest, who doesn't hate the Tremere? Danica would beg this salubri to come with him, as two would fight better than one, and she told him of the emptiness in her heart and how he had rekindled the colours of her soul. The salubri, named Raphael, could not deny these requests. What Danica had seen was the aura of someone who had achieved Golconda, supposedly, which he would do his best to educate. One must understand the arduous task set before the already agents of Niti Cordon to rise up the moral ladder, as it were, a babe learning to walk once more. He would endure all the forms of frustration a vampire would unveil with a steel resolve. Many vampires had attempted to walk the path of Golconda before, learning the secrets from Salot, particularly that of one of his childer, Mokor. Amongst these vampires were Crepheus, scholar and sorcerer, child of Mithras, and Hil and the Setite Pentuat. There was also the Cappadocian Drenis and a Malkavian scholar by the name of Drenis, the Salubri warrior Nephiel, and the Bruhar Carthage scholar Esha Shamash. In case this wasn't apparent, they would all meet at some point in this journey to form the Council of 12, but without a sacrifice. After all, 13 is deemed an unlucky number in Christian hearsay. In the waning years of the 15th century, Danica would lead Raphael back to the castle of Transylvania, which was a little too close to the Tremere fort of Syrios for the Salubri's liking, but it was better than surviving the harsh winters outside. However, the Hundedora castle had become a Tremere chantry, all serving the warlocks or destroyed by them and their unnatural magics. Only Danica's child Andazi survived. The three would begin to work to take back the castle. Raphael would summon allies, Antanazi would turn the mortals they had recruited into an army, and Danica would create a colossal vojt called Shklav, in addition to her own cultonic sorceries to lead an attack against the castle, successfully defeating the Tremere. It was without a great cost, as Raphael sacrificed himself to save Danica and the child, bringing a great sadness in the Coldon's heart. When she inspected the castle, she would claim the Tremere's treasures as their own. In addition to a Nosferatu she would name Bofu, meaning toad, sparing it for that what Raphael would want, bound to her in blood. As you can suspect, he was both a slave to his bestial instincts and his new domitor. Whilst I know not the memories suppressed by torture, I would guess this Bofu was destined to be converted into a gargoyle, and we both know what that entails, child. Danica was once again without a mentor, lost as it were, unsure how to further her own path, brooding on her mentor's teachings. She remembered his tutor, Mokor, and his disciples, Crepheus, Hil, and Pentuat, and through her mortal servants and 2 years of investigation, located a school in Italy which was a war-torn thanks to the mortals. She offered an invitation for them to use her home, the Hundedora Castle, as a peaceful place of study. The Canaanites were all too eager to take up the opportunity. A couple months later, the Bruja scholar Eshumashamash arrived, bringing his entire library. 2 years later, the Assamite Abdaluktabah would come to the Inconnu retreat, then a La Sombre prince by the name of Zamra Mutub. That winter, the Macavian, Cappadocian, and Salubri arrived. The Inconnu had now fully assembled, fit with plenty of Canaanites, but not all the Tremere were obliterated in that attack. Some managed to return and report to the then head chantry, Syrios. Obviously startled by this turn of events, Etrius and company would then plan for a much larger assault, as the Council of 12 would squabble to work out the best way to study and teach Golconda. No matter how heated the conversations got, it was the ancient Salubri Mokor that calmed things down. He would depart one night, leaving his disciples in Danica's care, and she did not realize this final meeting was indeed a goodbye. The Inconnu did not find him, but Etrius, who was instructed by the Salubri to meet his his father, Solot. As the Tremere did as his sire did, Etris devoured Mokor, learning that it was Solot within Tremere himself that summoned Mokor, and learning the location of the Inconnu, immediately sending in a huge attack force of might and arcane, not allowing the cult to attack. Of course, the Council of 12 felt this demise and knew the warlocks were coming, but not when. The Tremere launched for their surprise attack, casting a ward to keep out the spirits the 12 would use to combat the Tremere. Whilst it may not have lacked defenders, the Inconnu were, as the Liquid say, up shit creek without a paddle. But what would save the Inconnu would ultimately change the face of the sect forever. Greed, child of Mithras, would summon a demon. They would all have to agree for it to work, using their combined blood as a spiritual binding agent of sorts and a sacrifice of a mortal life, which mortals supposedly volunteered for. Only, it was not marketed as a demon, but a powerful spirit, which is why there was so passionate debate and verbal conflict, but eventually all were convinced. And so, mortals and vampires alike came together to conduct the ritual to summon a demon whose name I'm told is something along the lines of Nekanuranu on a makeshift altar covered in salt and arcane symbols. When the pact was sealed amongst the 12, it devastated the Tremere attackers of lightning, leaving only the smoky remains of most of the Tremere and covering the castle in smog, hiding it from the outside world. If you were to inspect Tremere archives on the matter, they would state that whatever the Inconnu did destroyed the castle as well, leaving it in ruins. This pact would bind the council in a castle for a year, only allowing the mortals into the Vosht Sklav of all things outside into the outside world. The Council of 12 showed their anger upon learning the pact would have indeed been renewed. If they did not agree, the demon would claim their souls, but it would be sent back to the abyss too, and demons do not want this. With more arguing, Danica decided on a lottery to decide the sacrifice, rather than sending anyone by choice. This would happen year after year, the demon choosing amongst the castle servants, and the arguing and debating became less and less passionate with each passing year. You may be wondering at this point how the Inconnu were able to achieve Golconda following such a bloodlust, but it wasn't really something on their minds. They had to uphold their safety and status quo, going about their own business in and out of the castle, via their servants and children, of course. I'm told that Demetrius the Malkavian, who I misnamed earlier, achieved Golconda upon waking up from a week's sleep sometime in the 17th century, but he is an ancient Malkavian, so you can choose to believe what you wish here. His people, Vamph, was the one that believed him, but was unable to work out how he did it, which shouldn't surprise anyone really. He is a bloody Malkavian. She sought advice from Pentuat the Setite, who ultimately gave her bad advice, and his guidance was, supposedly, a blend of Setite tradition of self-knowledge and ferreting out and purging false beliefs through the tests of fire. Basically, she had not challenged herself to put her beliefs to the test. After several years of trying, she would lock herself into the chapel, sealing the doors, not leaving there for 3 nights. What would happen is that she would succumb to Wasau, either through her own miscalculations or driven mad by the demon. The vampires would hunt for Vamph at night, and the mortals and Vosht by day. This was particularly bad, as she was one of the original 12 that swore the pact and could not renew the pact without the demon. They couldn't kill her, as the per-pact agreements were concerned on what to do next. An opportunity would land on Danica's feet, or rather, Sklav's feet, finding the heavily wounded Bufu, the Nosferatu thrall. They, Danica, would heal Bufu, and would allow him to join the hunt, which, after lots of outpacing and maneuvering, allowed Bufu to drain the white dry. The former clanmate's brood coursed his veins, and allowed him to replace Vamph come the next pact renewal. What would follow from my limited understanding is that the pact still persists, with the Tremere not so much of a concern anymore. The demon would sustain the pact by what I can presume is smaller pacts or favours, to ensure each of the vampires has their own reason to keep the pact going, but even without it, the year-active human sacrifice would have become familiar with the overtly human horror that a sacrifice is a very casual affair. After all, mortal livestock are just short-lived, insignificant creatures at the end of the day, especially ones whose existence is trapped in a castle locked in time. Faces tend to blur together and everyone just looks the same after a while. So you see, child, the Jihad is not the bickering and political chess game across the global factions, but the house is on a more local scale. Yes, what happens over there in that strange place in Romania is by human standards dark and twisted, but we both know that far more sinister things happen across the world. Keep this tale in your tiny head as a reminder of this educational topic, but forget about the $100 castle and those that dwell within. They have no power here. To be kept updated, follow the Law by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.